Economist.
So Linda, I mean, one of the huge challenges facing the world is how we create jobs in the developing world. I mean, Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher, said the highest form of philanthropy was enabling someone to be able to stand on their own feet, to be self-reliant. And your organisation has that as its mission by focusing on high-impact entrepreneurs and supporting them. Now, can you tell us about, what Endeavour does?
Sure. Endeavour is now 11 years old. And when I co-founded it, I had been living in Latin America. And what I noticed was there was a lot of money going into private equity, which was going into basically the top 10 families and their 20 companies. And there was just a beginning of focus, of emphasis on microfinance, which was great in terms of poverty alleviation, but not in terms of wealth and job creation. And in Argentina, if you know, a lot of the cab drivers like to talk, and they all had engineering degrees. And so I'd go around and say, why aren't you creating jobs? Why aren't you an entrepreneur? And there was no word in Spanish or Portuguese at the time for entrepreneur. And I thought this was crazy. So we set out at Endeavour to find what we call high-impact entrepreneurs that were people who would be too large for microfinance, that were aspirational, that really wanted to create hundreds, if not thousands of jobs and generate millions in revenues. They wanted to become the next Sergey Brin, who I just saw in the hall over there. And there was no support system for them. So Endeavour is really designed to bridge that gap between the private equity and the microfinance. And while we don't have a fund, because we're the neutral player that bridges the gap between all the funding that's in place in these countries and the entrepreneurs and the talent, there was no bridge of trust. So we focus on identifying the top talent with these scalable businesses. They're usually already in operation, but are at an inflection point and need help to grow.
So you find people they've had some success before they worked with you, and then you help them go to the next level. Is that the idea?
Yeah, what we found is, and I have a personal disagreement with the World Bank Doing Business report, because I think that they emphasize structural barriers to entrepreneurship, and they emphasize things like regulation, red tape, and even access to early stage financing. And access to financing is critically important. But I think that a lot of people can scrape together some friends and family, even if they're not from very well-off backgrounds. I mean, even a few hundred, a few $1,000s. And I think that what the problem is, I mean, in emerging markets, in developing countries, obviously that's not, you're talking about lesser sums. But what happens is a lot of entrepreneurs in these countries start businesses, but then they flatline. And they're at an inflection point after a few years where they're either going to crater and there's going to be no jobs, or whether they can scale and really create those hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs. And it's at that inflection point when Endeavour finds intervention is most important. So we have some startups, but we're often looking for companies with $500,000 to about $10 million in revenues. And people said we were crazy, that there'd be no companies at this level in emerging economies. And in the last 11 years, we've screened 18,000 entrepreneurs that fit this criteria. We've only selected 333 from the 220 companies we thought would be most high impact, but 18,000 met our criteria throughout Latin America, South Africa, Turkey, the Middle East. So here we are.
So as you look at the state of entrepreneurship in the emerging world, and as you say, many people just think there's no entrepreneurship at all.
Yeah.
But where are you seeing the hotspots at the moment? Where are you really seeing progress to entrepreneurs who are able to go from being small-scale operators into being sort of big, successful companies?
Well, what's interesting, we started in these emerging economies. We started in Latin America, in countries like Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, then went to South Africa, Turkey. We're now in Egypt and Jordan, and launching elsewhere. We're aiming to be in 25 emerging markets by 2015 to launch Endeavour's model. So clearly we're not tackling the poorest of the poor countries. And we think that infrastructure and health and education, you need to get a certain stage in terms of country development where I think this high impact entrepreneurship really can take off. So we think that our model in terms of Endeavour is best suited for countries transitioning from international aid to international investment. What's happening is a lot of these emerging markets submerge. And so you have the Thai baht crisis, you have the Argentina or Mexico crisis. And I think that that's where, if there's a sustainable private sector, where there's local job creators, we think those economies really can flourish. That's where we're seeing it. But I will tell you, we get emails at Endeavour from all over the world saying, I'm an entrepreneur, I have an idea, I already have 10 people, I think I can have 300, who's going to help me? And that's places like Tanzania, it's the Palestinian territories, it's in the lesser developed countries in Latin America. So I think that we started in these emerging economies, but it's a phenomenon that's happening all over the world.
But at the moment, the really hot, exciting areas are places like Turkey and the Middle East and so forth.
Turkey, the Middle East, South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, all over. I'm surprised that entrepreneurs are very similar all the world over. They have great ideas, they have passion, they have persistence, they're considered crazy by their peers and often by their parents are about to disown them for taking such risks. But they're people who, if there's a system that can bet on them, often what they need is mentoring. They need role models, aspirational role models, but also accessible role models. They need access to networks, and they need smart capital. So these are the things that Endeavor is trying to galvanize for these young people.
Now, one of the things that fascinates me about Endeavor is the history of Endeavor itself. You're a non-profit rather than a for-profit, which is an interesting choice in itself. But also, you very much rely on philanthropy to fund your organisation. And I'm interested. You had a difficult time getting started. So, what are your reflections on philanthropists, how they work, what they do well, what they do badly?
Jeff Timmons, who passed away a couple of years ago and was a professor at Harvard Business School and then at Babson, was a friend of mine. And Jeff Timmons used to write in his entrepreneurship books about the correlation between entrepreneurs and philanthropy. And I think that if you look at the great institutions, the Carnegies, the Ford, the Rockefellers of years before, and today, Gates, Omidyar, Dell, Google, there is a correlation, I think, between entrepreneurship and philanthropy. So when Endeavor started out, we wanted to promote in these countries that had not only a dearth of entrepreneurship, but a real dearth of philanthropy, that connection. So what we said is Endeavor has to be pulled in by the country. So we were pulled in by the top business leaders. Endeavor raises $3 million from the private sector before we launch our model in a country. And over time, the entrepreneurs that we support are expected to donate back in terms of cash or in terms of equity as a pay-it-forward model. And what's interesting is the entrepreneurs themselves know that 5 or 10 people took a bet on them so that they could get the mentorship and networks they could to scale their companies, and it's their responsibility to pay it forward for the next generation. So Brazil and Mexico, 2 of our earliest countries, are projecting by 2010 and 2012, respectively, to be self-sustained primarily based on these entrepreneur contributions.
Great. Well, thank you very much.